All right, welcome everyone. Thank you all so much for joining. Welcome in. I see many still connecting to audio, so we'll wait just a moment for everybody to get settled. Welcome everyone. Awesome, it looks like we've got most folks here and connected who are watching live. For those of you who are watching the recording of this, thank you so much for watching as well. Many of you have seen my face already this week, but I'm Sarah Birch. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Associate Director of Admissions and Recruitment for the Brown School. Thanks all for joining today for day 3 of Admitted Student Week, where we are joined by a couple folks and a current student who will be talking about engaging communities in systems design. These folks represent one of our great research centers at the Brown School, the Social System Design Lab. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our presenters and let you take it from there. Thanks all.
Great. Thank you very much, Sarah, and hi everyone. I'm going to share my screen so we can do a bit of introductions, but I'm Ellis Ballard. I use he, him pronouns. I'm the director of the Social System Design Lab and a member of the faculty at the Brown School. And what we are doing today is, talking about our work, which is sort of a rarity in schools of social work, public health, and social policy, and to talk about sort of what is some of the work of the Social System Design Lab, ways to get engaged, and what does that look like in practice. So what I want to do before we get going and before we introduce ourselves, the 3 presenters, is ask you to add to the chat if you're willing and able. Your name, your pronouns, where you're joining from, and what brought you to this session. I'll put it in the chat as well. I just like to know who's here. Please do add to the chat because that will help us determine what do we want to focus on later on when we get to more Q&A stuff. But as you do that, Allie and Ebo, do you want to introduce yourselves?
Yes, hi everybody. I'm losing my voice a little bit, but my name is Allie Farrell. I use she, her pronouns, and I work at the lab. I'm a program coordinator leading our work in K-12 education and a graduate of the Brown School a couple of years ago where I did the system dynamics specialization, took a bunch of these classes. So happy to be here with you all.
Hi everyone, my name is Ebo Awoma. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a second-year student in the public health and social policy programs, and I'm also a research assistant with the SSDL and taking a couple of these classes as well. So be glad to be here and meet everyone.
Great, thanks y'all. And somebody is weed whacking right outside my house that started about a minute and a half ago. So I'm gonna move as I do this. But their agenda for the today, and thanks folks for adding your responses here. Doing this welcome, we'll do a very, very brief intro to some concepts in system dynamics, and then talk about applications of CBSD here in St. Louis, as well as in work globally. So we'll highlight 3 projects. Then we'll talk about CBSD integration with public health, social policy, social work, but Ebo is going to talk about her experience in public health and social policy. And our goal is to leave a good amount of time for questions and answers at the end. To start us out, sort of a broad way of thinking about this is that inherent in our work, no matter what program you're here for, what program you're considering coming for, you're working on complex social challenges, health challenges, policy challenges. And one of the themes in a session we did earlier on Monday, folks were talking a lot about wicked, messy problems. And from the world of system dynamics, we think about these as like a ball of yarn or like a pair of headphones that are all crammed up in a ball in your pocket, where you look at it and you say, okay, I'm trying to disentangle, try to create meaning here. And you pull on the headphone, you pull on the USB cable, and the knot just gets tighter, right? It's resistant to simple solutions. And so this is a slide adapted from a workshop I was part of as part of the Data for Black Lives 2 conference a year and a half ago at this point, where we think about all of these issues that we're caring about as these messy, wicked knots. And the perspective we bring from where we sit in system dynamics and social system design lab is thinking about the source of this messiness is, among other things, the complexity of these problems. That these problems are changing over time. We can't just do a needs assessment at one point and then have it all figured out for an agenda for 10 years. That the factors are evolving. There are multiple stakeholders who have different goals and different perspectives, and they're acting in pursuit of those goals, and they might interact, they might conflict. There's time delays between action and response, where you start an intervention or there's some sort of a crisis and we don't see the consequences until weeks, months, years, decades, centuries later. There's feedback relationships where we don't have simple A causes B, which results in C. We have A causes B, which then changes the conditions that created A coming into being. And then C evolves, and that pushes back against the initial response of B, right? We have these loopy relationships. And all of this can create unintended or unanticipated consequences of action in all of our domains. And part of the work of system dynamics is saying, how do we work with that complexity? How do we make sense of this complexity rather than ignoring it, rather than reducing it, rather than trying to sort of just put our blinders on and work in a narrow band? And so you may be familiar with this systems thinking iceberg idea. We use iceberg metaphors all the time, whatever field. But part of the way we think about it is that individual events, individual people getting vaccinated against COVID, individual teens dropping out from high school, individual experiences of racially motivated violence. These are what is above the surface. This is what we see, we experience on a day-to-day pattern. But that reality is like an iceberg. There's a lot underneath the surface. That those individual events need to be understood in the context of patterns over time. Who is experiencing them? How has that rate of incidents changed over time? Is it sort of just a constant pattern over time, or is it increasing? Or have we seen a spike and now we're on the downturn, right? What are those patterns of behavior? And what is the underlying social, administrative, bureaucratic structure that's giving rise to these patterns of behavior that manifest in these events? And finally, how do our norms, our beliefs, our mindsets, and the goals of individuals working in these systems inform the design of these systems that result in these patterns of behavior that manifest in individual events over time? Those are the kind of questions that we ask, try to make sense of this knot, try to untangle it. And so in system dynamics, our two primary tools are qualitative causal maps, which is a photo on the left, and I'm going to talk about this project with the Salud Mesoamerica initiative in a little bit, and quantitative simulation models, which are mathematical models that allow us to ask what-if questions about policy interventions. And these tools are the tools that we use to first dive under the surface. My friend and colleague Donald Martin talks about this as learning to scuba dive, right? Going underneath the surface to model out what is the system structure, exploring what are those underlying beliefs, mindsets, and goals. And not just stopping there, but saying, how do we use this to change those mindsets, beliefs, and goals? How do we use this to design something new that's going to change those trajectories? create new events so that individual teens don't drop out and they might have otherwise, or people don't contract COVID than they might have otherwise. So this is sort of in 5 minutes, the big picture vision for what is the work of the Social System Design Lab. It's saying, how do we do this? How do we train people to scuba dive, to use Donald's metaphor here? And so the Social System Design Lab, as Sarah set us up, is a lab at the Brown School that's dedicated to developing the science and the application of system dynamics as applied to human services and in communities. And we do work using collaborative group model building, participatory work, and computer simulation modeling here at home in St. Louis, but also around the world. And this is a list of places where we have ongoing work, or we have collaborations, we're supporting others, or probably the past year or two. We teach at the Brown School in simulation modeling, group model building. We have short courses and then advanced method skill labs. And then we have professional development collaborations and ways for other folks who aren't Brown School students to dive in as well. So that's my, short spiel, but I'm going to pass it off to Allie to start talking about what does some of this look like? And I'm going to move my computer while you do that.
Yeah, thank you for everyone writing in the chat. It's great to hear what brings everyone here, and we'll get to opportunities to get involved in a little bit. But sharing a little bit of, sharing out on a few projects that have been going on in the lab and different ways to apply these concepts that Ellis just shared about. This project is called Systems Thinking for Education Equity Partnership. It's a partnership between us here at the Social System Design Lab and 3 other organizations in St. Louis, EdHub STL, SKIP, and Educators for Social Justice. And this one is about working with teachers and educators to learn systems thinking tools and then help them apply systems thinking tools to issues they identify in their schools, classrooms, and to help their students start learning systems thinking. So this was convening educators around the topic of racial disparities in school discipline in the St. Louis region, and using that topic to model and learn the tools of system dynamics, and then learn how to apply those tools into their classrooms. This is part of a larger portfolio of work in the education space, which includes working with high schoolers over the years to identify issue in the community that affects young people, and then having helping high schoolers learn and apply these tools with one another. That's called Changing Systems. We've done the Changing Systems Youth Summit for quite a few years. So that's kind of one angle. Students at the Brown School were involved in this project, helping compile resources for the teachers to use, going to these sessions and helping facilitate and do note taking and things like that. And then when I was a student at the Brown School, I got really involved in the high school program and did my practicum with the lab that way. We have 2 more projects to share about. I'll pass it back to Ellis for these 2.
Great. So the second project I want to highlight is actually sort of a combination of a whole bunch. But this is work with an organization called the Inter-American Development Bank on 2 initiatives, the Salud Mesoamerica initiative, and now that sort of has sunsetted, and now this has evolved into Mesoamerica Malaria. So these are 2 massive projects that are collaborations between the Inter-American Development Bank, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the Global Fund, and the Carlos Slim Foundation that are working to support health system capability development to address massive health issues that are addressing Mesoamerica, Central America. And so our labs first got involved in the Salud Mesoamerica initiative to support a collaboration with the government of Honduras to think about how to bend stagnating curves in decreases in maternal mortality and neonatal mortality. That the government of Honduras had made huge strides in reducing mortality rates in both these populations since the early 1990s. But that improvement had really stagnated since about 2005. And the question was, why is this happening? It's not as if the pressure was taken off the gas. It's not as if something fundamentally transformatively different had changed. This was something about the structure of the system that's creating resistance to that continued improvement. And so from probably about 2013 until this formal project has come to an end in 2019, 2020, we were working with the government of Honduras and the IDB about using system dynamics tools for strategic modeling to explore what is it about the system that is resisting continued improvement, even though effort is continuing to be pushed, as well as supporting the use of system dynamics tools to facilitate policy dialogue, to say, okay, how does this translate actually into the drafting of new policies that will incorporate some of the insights from this modeling work. And so this photo on the left is from a policy dialogue workshop that was facilitated by me and some folks from the IDB with colleagues from the Ministry of Health in Honduras, as well as from healthcare systems, advocacy groups in Tegucigalpa. And folks are sharing out this model right now is about sort of the relationship between social factors related to teen pregnancy and these underlying public health issues around maternal and neonatal mortality. And part of what was being wrestled with here is saying, what are the boundaries of health policy? How do we think about health policy as expanding beyond vaccinations and hospital beds, to be thinking about some of these things that may operate in education spaces or in social services spaces?
I'm sorry, Ellis, it's still on the steep slide if you want to go to the next one. Is it not for you?
It is not for me. I will reset it. Thank you. Is that better?
Yeah, there we go.
Thank you. Wow, okay. So now I have some logos and I have some photos relevant here. So in the photo on the left is from this policy dialogue workshop in Tegucigalpa. Folks from, this is a mix. She's a vice health minister. She's from the IDB team talking about this teen pregnancy issue. And then on the right is an evolution of this project where the IDB technical assistance team has evolved and they've been pulled into sort of a new initiative around elimination of malaria across all of Central America. This is being a public health target that is actually realistic in this next 10 years is how this is being thought about. And part of how we're using system dynamics modeling is to do some work to conceptualize a theory of change of this strategy from a feedback perspective, and then developing learning and dialogue tools for work with country partners to say, how do we assess potential trajectories given our existing data, our existing reality, and then also think about what does that mean in terms of priorities in Colombia being different than priorities in Costa Rica, being different than priorities in Belize, for instance. And so this is a project that sort of has evolved and will continue to evolve. We've had folks do practicum with the Inter-American Development Bank in Panama City as part of this, been involved in modeling and model reviews as part of it. And I'm actually not sure how this is going to evolve in terms of the malaria work because this is fresh as of December of this year. And then the final project I want to highlight is a long-term relationship with the Foundation for Ecological Security. FES is a nonprofit organization in India that has been working to support sustainable livelihoods of rural communities that are specifically reliant on common land resources. So hills, rivers, lakes, ponds, these natural resource assets that aren't formally owned by anyone and yet are being managed formally and informally by multiple communities. And so FES has been working for 30 years in local communities to think about village strategic planning, advocacy and asset building to connect with national level employment schemes, as well as supporting land tenure rights for villages so that it's not gobbled up by corporations or by other resources. And some of the foundations of our work at the Social System Design Lab are based in relationships with FES, thinking about integrating community-based or system dynamics modeling with participatory rural appraisal and community-based participatory research. And so these two photos are from work with FES. This person right here is Pratiti Priyadarshini, who's the director of research now. When she started working with us, she was a new staff member. But facilitating some modeling and strategic planning sessions in Udaipur in the northwest of India, thinking about the interdependency of ecological and social resources in communities and how are folks managing those resources over time. So FES is a long-term partner of our lab. We've had folks do practicum with FES. We have ongoing modeling work that we're going to be doing this summer with them. In the past, we've had courses in India with FES, and we'll have to figure out feasibility of those types of options moving forward. But this is an opportunity, it's sort of a long-term relationship that we're thinking about, this embedding of system dynamics methods and in very, very hyper-local change initiatives. So there's 3 projects that sort of, all 3 of them are embedded in long-term relationships that have maybe multiple initiatives or multiple projects that span longer than a career at the Brown School, a student's career at the Brown School. But wanted to give a bit of a flavor for what that looks like. And I'm going to pass it over to you, Allie, to talk about what does this mean for you guys, people who are about to go join the Brown School, we hope.
Yeah, so hopefully the quick intro slides gave you a little idea about what system dynamics is, if it's new to you. And then the last couple slides showed you what it looked like a little bit. And now we're going to talk about, if you are interested, what different ways you can get involved at the Brown School. And before we get into that, I'll say that we see our role in the lab as helping students learn system dynamics when you're here, but also once you take a class or get involved in any way, it's a long-term relationship. We want to support you to integrate system dynamics and community-based system dynamics in your career as an alumni. So please do get involved if you're interested, and we can keep in touch for a long, long time. So the next slide, Ellis. All right, so just a quick overview of what courses we offer to kind of tell you what the difference between them is. So the first one up top, Introduction to System Dynamics for Advancing Equity, is listed as a skill lab, a 1-unit skill lab. So this is really just a taster of what is systems thinking. It's more of a seminar than a skill lab, just kind of some of it's online and then you meet for 1 weekend. So it's really just like, is this for me? Or if you don't have room in your schedule to fit in a whole 3-unit class yet, it's again a taster of what system dynamics is and what it has to do with social work, public health, and social policy. The core courses we offer, this one with the really long name, Designing Sustainable Social Policies and Programs, a System Dynamic Approach. That one is, we call the simulation course. So that's kind of the more quantitative side of system dynamics. What you do in that class is spend the whole semester creating a simulation model about a problem you really care about. So that class is really about the use of data, what counts as data, and running models to see what system structure produces the outcomes that we see. The total flip side, the other angle of system dynamics, is the other course we offer, which is called Community-Based System Dynamics. And this is about working with community organizations to figure out how to apply these methods of system dynamics to address problems that they care about. So this is really about facilitation, working with others, thinking about power and things like that in facilitation and community projects. So if you're able to take both, that's awesome. If you want to take one and not the other, please reach out and we can talk about which one is a better fit for you. The last 3 classes down at the bottom are all skill labs. So we have in the social work program, system dynamics specialization. And these 3 skill labs are elements of that specialization. So once you've taken one of our core courses, you can go deeper in using those skills in these 3 skill labs. Those aren't limited to only social work students though. Anybody can take them. So if you took the simulation course and you want to keep practicing and using those skills, then you would take the relevant skill lab. Going to the next slide. This is just a visual to show how you might sequence these courses if you take the system dynamics specialization as a social work student. So the specialization is 9 credits of system dynamics coursework, and then you apply system dynamics in some way in your practicum. So we won't go into this too much right now, but again, those 2 core courses, the 3 skill labs, and your practicum, you can use that taster introductory class I mentioned as one of those 3 skill labs as well. Next slide. Even if you don't take a formal class, system dynamics course, we'd love to meet you, and there's lots of ways to get involved. We have weekly brown bags on Wednesdays from 12 to 1. You can start attending whenever you want. Just send us an email at that SSDL@wustl.edu, and we'll add you to the weekly invite. So that's a space where students, staff, faculty come together to talk about system dynamics. We do something called consultancy protocol. So if somebody's facing, has like a question, they just want feedback on a model or a project they're working on, they can pose it to the group, and the rest of the group can help give them support and ideas. We do journal clubs in there, and then share out on projects that people are working on. Today, 2 students shared a model that they've been working on this semester. Another opportunity to get involved is to participate in group model building workshops. That used to look like in-person stuff, and lately it's been a lot of virtual workshops. But we do have virtual stuff going on, so we always have roles for students to play and attend those workshops if they're interested, and student practice sessions. So students, as part of their classes or as research assistants, are leading group model building projects, and will host practice sessions to see how the choreography goes and practice prompts and things like that. So you can always attend those if you want to practice system dynamic skills. Right now on Mondays, we have 2 research assistants who are testing different online modeling tools every Monday. So that's kind of an example of something to get involved in. And then this last opportunity is you can become a paid research assistant, just like Ebwa, who I'm about to pass it to. This really seems to work best when a student has already taken a system dynamics course, because everything we do is system dynamics. But even though your time at the Brown School hasn't started yet, if you're interested, we encourage you again to reach out before you've taken the class, just so we can know what you're interested in, plug you into some of these other opportunities so you can start learning and getting involved as soon as you want to. Again, there's our email. Feel free to reach out also with any questions from today's presentation. But right now, if you go to the next slide, I'm going to pass it to Ebwa, who is a current Masters of Public Health and Masters of Social Policy student at the Brown School, to share a student's perspective of all of this stuff.
Thanks, Allie, and thanks, Ellis. Hi again, everyone. As Allie mentioned, I'm currently a dual review student in the Public Health and Social Policy programs. I'm in my 2nd year, and then this fall, I start my 3rd year. Next slide, please. So as Ali mentioned, I've been working with SSDL, I think, over a year now, and I primarily work on their knowledge management projects. I also work with other research centers at the Brown School, and work with different groups at the Brown School and university in different capacities. Next slide, please. So to talk a little bit about some of the projects that I've worked on, one of them was an online knowledge management repository. So what that means essentially is, as Ellis and Ali have talked about, the SSDL is a research center, and a lot of our work really prioritizes working with communities, different organizations and groups. So there is a lot of documented material, and how that is shared, how that knowledge is built, and how it's kept accessible is something that is central to the work that the lab does. So that project really was moving all of that onto, it's called the Open Science Framework. It is an online platform that tries to encourage researchers to have open science practices. Another project that I worked on recently are the methods briefs. And again, the focus on system dynamics methodology. So how are these methods used? Who is using them? What are some examples? What are use cases? What are pitfalls? What are obstacles that people have encountered before? That's something that the lab has already been paying attention to. And so there's a methods brief series. That's the picture that you see on the right. It is in works currently. It'll be published probably over the next few weeks. And so it covers different topics. This one shown is about the Iceberg principle, which I think Ellis talked about earlier. There are other topics as well about hypotheses, and other system dynamics paradigms. So that's another project that I've worked on. And then more recently was an educational model synthesis. As I mentioned, a lot of the relationships that the lab has with communities for these different projects, either class projects or direct lab SSDL projects, build a lot of material. And so how do you put that together to actually improve educational outcomes? So this project looks at, I want to say over 5 years, Ali, I believe it's over 5 years of educational modeling in the St. Louis region and putting all of that together. You know, what did we learn from this? And this covers different topics, from bullying to school discipline to supporting students' mental health, to empowering school districts to improve teacher diversity. So bringing all of that together and developing recommendations for an ongoing project is pretty much what that model synthesis was trying to achieve. Next slide, please. And then more directly for me, so some of the projects I've worked on, and this is independent of the SSDL. So this is where we start talking about, you know, how do you use system dynamics in your practice in my instance, I'll be public health and social policy. So one project was with the CBSD class. That was a group project. I had 2 other team members. So we work with the Marylanders for Farm Workers Coalition. And it's a group of different committees, organizations, just concerned individuals who were looking at improving the working conditions of farm workers, particularly in Maryland, but other states on the East Coast. And that started because they realized that when the state was making regulations to protect essential workers, so, you know, what do companies have to put in place? Things about hand hygiene, masking, and personal protection and distancing. None of that was extended to farm workers. And so the coalition came together to try and push that forward. So the project really was looking at the landscape. So what do we know about farm worker protections? Are there examples from other states? What statistics are relevant to this conversation? And then how do we bring everyone together? Because that's one thing that's very exciting about system dynamics for me, really, is there's an issue and then there are different parties involved and everyone sees it differently, but you can't solve it unless everyone is pretty much together in some way and everyone has some insights. So for instance, when we're designing the workshops, we looked at bringing in the coalition, definitely, but also farm owners. So the people who own the farms that the farm workers are working on, community groups that represent and advocate for the farm workers themselves. So that's just one example of how using these system methods that plays out in practice. So, and that project was, we did it over, I think it was the fall semester. And the coalition is currently working with those insights and the outlines that we created to try and, again, move this forward. So very excited to see how that shapes up long term. Another project, and this one is pretty new, is the Translating Evidence to Care for Farm Workers project. So I and a team member, who's also a student at the Brown School, pitched a policy research initiative to the Clinton Global Initiative University. It's a year-long fellowship cohort for students, and then you pitch community projects. It can be from pretty much any topic. We have people working on things all the way from environmental justice to product design to improve health outcomes. Like that's just how much of a diversity of projects there are. And so for our project, we're looking specifically at working with child farm worker populations. So how do we improve their health and well-being? You know, what can we do to improve educational outcomes? Things like missed school days and high school graduation rates. And one of the ways that I'm using CBSD in this project is doing group model building workshops. And the focus of that really is to bring together the different community organizations that work on this issue. Because one thing we quickly realize is that there are organizations that work with farm workers, but specifically with child farm workers, that issue hasn't received the same level of attention and focus in the literature. So this project really is about bringing that in, right? And using systems thinking to see, well, what do we understand about this issue? Who is doing what, and what action ideas can we generate from there? And the models you see are just from maybe that's from the Marylanders for Farm Workers Coalition project that we did over the fall. So I think that's pretty much it. Those are 2 projects that I've been working on using SD methods. independent of my work with the SSDL. And I think I'll pass it back to Allie and Ellis. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Ebwa. And I think you set us up beautifully to talk about sort of like, what does this mean as a formal research lab? And what do you think about involvement, participation as a student, and then also saying building skills to develop your own body of work. I'm excited to learn about it and to see how you evolve with that, but it's not sponsored by me, for instance. So we've dumped a lot on y'all, but what we'd love to do is open it up for questions, things that maybe you want to hear more about, concerns, questions about the translation of this opportunity to your career or beyond. Yeah, please do open up either in the chat or verbally with questions, thoughts, reflections. So Tomas asks, what's the vision of the lab? How does the lab want to expand the use of system dynamics or CBSD to advance social justice? I think it's a really great question. So to be transparent, the Social System Design Lab, actually we're going through a strategic revisioning right this moment. I became the director of the lab this past summer amidst everything the whole world is going through right now. And so we are figuring out how does this existing vision or existing mission of developing the science and application of system dynamics in human services and communities, how does that mission look in 2021 and beyond? This mission was articulated in 2010. And so that question of what does that look like moving forward is actually very much in process and being explored. I can tell you, one of the things that we're thinking about right now, and one of the ways in which we're evolving, is thinking more critically about what is the role of our research lab in relation to a community of practitioners, of people who are using system dynamics in different forms in all kinds of domains. When this lab came to be in 2009, the whole premise of system dynamics as applied to social issues was novel, was something that people weren't doing. But now that's changed. And part of what I think there's a really exciting opportunity about is saying, thinking of this lab and the Brown School community as a component of a larger engine of innovation around like expanding the boundaries and expanding the impact of what do we mean by system dynamics. So, this function here within schools of social work, public health, and social policy means that we are innovating, experimenting, doing work ourselves, but also planting seeds with alums who are going and doing their own work and creating new opportunities. And so that's not really answering your question, but I think that part of where the evolution of this lab is going is thinking about dialogue among activists, community organizers, researchers, program implementers to wrestle some of those questions rather than presuming that the answers come from St. Louis, 3rd floor of Hillman Hall only. So that's one way I think about it. But I'd be happy to chat with you more about that. So what are some employers that are looking specifically for system dynamic skills? Thinks they may be valuable in any career, but also thinking about employability after grad school. Allie, do you want to talk about that? I know I have thoughts.
Sure, yeah. So if you Google or if you go onto Indeed or LinkedIn or whatever and search system dynamicist jobs, not a lot come up, that's for sure. It's there's not a huge market for a system dynamicist, but there is a market for, like you said, the skills that you're using when you're using system dynamics. So like strategic thinking, addressing complex problems, systems change, collective impact, those sorts of things. And what we've found is when students can communicate how, like specifically how they've used the concepts of system dynamics to address and solve a complex problem, and kind of tell that story through their interview process, then that's what leads to exciting positions. I can't really say what position or what employer, because what we try to do is help students bridge system dynamics with what they're interested in. So let's say you're interested in program evaluation or program design. How are you using system dynamics to do that better? Let's say you're interested in strategic planning. How are you using system dynamics to do that better? And then it's something that kind of sets you apart. How would you answer that question of specific employers, Ellis?
Yeah, so there's a range. I think that sort of common avenues that folks who are system dynamics specialization students or just enthusiasts, whether they're specialization or not, go into. There's a set of people who are in sort of foundations and strategic giving. There's one of our, so that's sort of a body of folks who are about the sort of the strategy about what should be prioritized. There's another set of folks who go into consulting in different forms. So either big Booz Allen Hamilton type of consulting firms or small sort of boutique social impact consulting type of groups. Another sets of people go into think tanks and applied research work. One of our alums from the master's and then PhD program, who's still very, very close friend and colleague, Saris Chung, is the executive director of an organization called SKIP, which is a think tank here in St. Louis that works on education transformation. And so it's thinking about using system dynamics tools to inform regional collaboration and prioritize strategic giving around getting meaningful systems change here. And then there's a lot of folks who go into sort of community engaged work, facilitation, coalition building, collective impact type of work. An alum who's actually teaching the community-based system dynamics class with me right now is named Elizabeth Richardson, and they are working with folks, an organization called Eastside Aligned and the Early Learning Partnership on the other side of the Mississippi River in East St. Louis, thinking about integrating community-based system dynamics into collective impact mobilization on pre-K to kindergarten transitions. So again, yeah, it's not so much saying, how do I find that job on Indeed? It's more about sort of identifying what's the unique value add of this perspective that other folks don't have. Other questions that we're seeing. So Megan asks, do you tend to focus on a particular topic when working with students, or are you open to applying system dynamics to various areas? So think about disparities in mental health care based on race, SES. So really there's two dimensions. The way I think about it here is that we have a body of work that's of the social system design lab that we can plug people into in the context of research assistant positions, and that we bring into the classroom no matter what, because we teach and do work. And there are some broad themes around mental health care access, around community strategic planning, around sort of cross-sectoral coalition building around healthcare access. Those are three of the ones that come to mind because they're in the top of my head right now, where a lot of the examples are plugged in there. But at the same time, part of, I think what's cool about the Brown School is that people have opportunities to work across domains, or to sort of weave together their own experiences. Eboa, you talked about, you're working with us on knowledge management work, but you have research assistant positions with other research centers, and you are pursuing your own ideas around weaving together social policy and public health. And that part of the sort of nature of the Social System Design Lab is we are focused on methods rather than focus on a topic area. So the question is not, is system dynamics right for this topic? It's saying, what is the contribution of these types of methods to advance a solution to a topic you care about? And the folks who work here, Allie and me, first and foremost, are very much sort of omnivorous in our, we're methods people, and that's our role. And part of that bridging is saying, how do you bring deep experience and knowledge to a topic, and then we work out what does that look like to move further. I don't know, Ebua or Allie, what you say to that question?
No, I agree, and I think that's really well said. I think the lab is a good space for that. I remember when I wanted to take these classes, and it started like this. I think it was an informational seminar for one of the courses, and I was asking these questions like, how does SD, play into public health and social policy? And long story short, I started working with the lab. But I think that is really where it starts, like asking these questions. What do I want to do? Like, what are my interests? And your interests will change. Like your interests will definitely change. I don't have the exact same interests that I came into the Brown School with. I don't see myself necessarily doing the same types of jobs I did before I came to the Brown School. Public health is so broad and social policy is even broader. And there's so many ways to bring that together. So I think that SD offers a lot of opportunities, and the lab also is a really good space for doing that. Like even thinking about the CBSD class, I remember we had surveys to try and understand what interests different students had, and then matching them with the community projects based on those interests. So again, there's this issue you're passionate about, and the question you need to ask yourself is, how can I use SD methods to solve this problem? So I think asking those questions is really the beginning, and from there just keep building and seeing what's available, and moving on from there.
Something I really like thinking about is like system dynamics is not the perfect solution in every situation. So I like thinking about when should we not be using system dynamics. So it's not necessarily like what topic area, but what situation within that topic area. So there's like a high school student I worked with in the Changing Systems Youth Summit who said, if you're on a hike and you break your ankle, don't make a system dynamics model about it, just call an ambulance. Like there's a clear answer. So sometimes we think about like, could this be a meeting instead of a workshop where we're making a model? Could we just look at the data? Could we do a cost benefit analysis to figure out what the right direction is? So I say that to share that within the areas we talk about, we're not trying to say system dynamics is like always the thing, but when things are really messy, people aren't using the same language to talk about the same thing, there's not a lot of consensus, these facilitated activities can be really helpful to sort of get people on the same page and start to break those silos that people are in. And I don't know enough about social entrepreneurship to take the specialization to take a stab at the next question. So I'll let Ellis do that one.
Yeah, and so, and I don't want to speak for the curriculum focuses there, but your answer to that last bit that you added, Allie, I think sets us up nicely for this question. Where part of the difference between social entrepreneurship and system dynamics is that in the system dynamics specialization, we're coming from this lens, exploring the application of a set of perspectives and tools that focus on the use of these maps and models, think about underlying system structure for exploration and design. And then there's another set of principles that are, if you dive deeper, that we talk around feedback and accumulation and nonlinearity as how we understand the world working. And so that's the blatant bias, to quote a system dynamicist, of what we do, is that we look at the world through these lenses and through these tools. And that's not to say that everything has to be done through those lenses, but that's the contribution we're providing. Social entrepreneurship has a blatant bias of looking at the world through a different lens. They're not bound or grounded in the system dynamics perspective. And so the coursework and social entrepreneurship and system dynamics, in some ways is probably reaching some of the same targets in terms of sustained innovation and change within communities and organizations, but the means through which we get there takes a different path. And there have long been overlap, that people who are System dynamics students take social entrepreneurship classes. Students who are social entrepreneurship students take system dynamics classes. Our simulation modeling class right now has business students, engineers, social policy, public health, social work, all enrolled in the same class. And so it really is about like, what is that lens that you're crafting, that you want to have a through line through your education, more than one talks about social change, the other one doesn't. Yeah, so I don't know. That's how I think about that question. So Amalia, I'm reading through as I'm wondering. So nice to hear about not being sure enough about the path at the Brown School. And so encouraging to see that process. I'd say I'm always torn in these kind of sessions where I'm like, do I say something that's going to make Sarah be cringe? But I think that one of the things that I've reflected, I've been at the Brown School. I was a student here, and then I was gone for a while, and then working here and teaching. That the people who really seem to gravitate towards that system dynamics work are those folks often who feel like they're in in-between spaces. That they're kind of like, I'm really interested in children, youth, and families, but I'm also interested in research. I'm really interested in social entrepreneurship, but I'm also interested in epidemiology. It's this sort of like, how do I weave together? This is just a trend that I've observed, but I think there's a lot of that kind of interaction and intersection. And I think that that's true. I would totally endorse what Ebo, you were saying, that's, and I'm curious, Sarah, actually, what you'd say. I think that's one of the goals of the Brown School, is that you come in and moving this direction, and some subset of people start moving in another direction. And that's a really healthy and productive change. Again, this is my perspective, but I think that that's as a professor, I think that's success, right? Is have people revise and refine their vision and their trajectory, so.
I was a children, youth, and families concentration and knew I didn't want to be doing direct practice, but that was my background's in youth development and working in schools. So that's the topic I wanted to be talking about, learning about when I was at the Brown School. But kind of like Ellis was saying, I needed a way to bridge sort of systems level, macro level conversations with this concentration that was more focused on direct practice. So that I found that in the system dynamics coursework, because I was able to bring my own interest area, topics related to children, youth, and families, but then look at it through this lens, and really learn. And the facilitation part of the community-based system dynamics course has been relevant for all types of projects I've worked on since then. There doesn't seem like enough time to explore it all. I don't know if Ebua should answer, because Ebua seems to do everything. And I don't, it's like a superhero person, but what would you say, Ebua?
First of all, not a superhero person. And I think I put this in the chat, just being really good about, I love learning. So I don't know, learning just amazes me. So being really good about understanding what resources are available to you within the Brown School and within the rest of WashU's like systems and resources is, I don't know, it's magical. Like I mentioned the Writing Center, like I work with them on almost all my papers, and I can see how much my writing has improved. And that's just something as simple as writing. So it's, yeah, understanding that, learning from other people. And there's so many ways to keep track of stuff and stay on top of things. It could be an online platform for setting meetings. There's so many of them now. When you have to work with 5 people, you have to figure out a time that works for people. So I'm a very big fan of tapping into these resources. The libraries, like this interlibrary loan for getting books, articles, papers, different things. You have the course reserve, so you don't actually have to purchase textbooks out of pocket. You can get them through the library. So there are all these resources that are set up, but there are also so many of them. So I know it's overwhelming when you first come in. It's like, oh my God, like, how do I do this? Like, what do I need to do? What do I need to do? Just figure it out one day at a time. And there are people who are interested in helping. And then also, I think building a culture of helping is something that's really important. So if you find a resource that was helpful to you, I'm a very big fan of sharing with everyone. So I always put on a discussion thread like, oh my goodness, I just found this thing. It made my life easy. Please go use this thing. And I think that doing that, it makes a better learning experience for you and then for everyone else that you learn with. So just being able to tap into resources that are available and having very much a learning mindset. And because there will be challenges, there will be obstacles. Sometimes things just won't go the way you think they would, but working through that and seeing it as a learning experience, I think that it's a really good way to enjoy your time at the Brown School.
That's awesome, Ebwa. I would say from a faculty point of view, we are, as a whole, really jazzed to connect and build relationships and sort of reflect on the ways that we aren't just a professor delivering content, and that as a whole, probably 99% or so are really jazzed to help sort of talk through those bridges, those connections, those sort of like, how do I make sense of these seemingly contradictory impulses in my trajectory? That there's a lot of curious people out there, and sort of bringing your curiosity to class and to relationships and to learning from people who are second years or third years as you're starting out to get to that point about sharing and helping, I think is a really awesome way to carve that unique path.
And I'll just say that the first semester I found was the biggest workload. Like it was the hard, what are the introductory or the like first requirement classes called?
Foundations.
Foundations, yeah, the foundations, the first semester I found was like the most papers, the hardest about. So I say that because there's time to get involved in everything past that first semester, you know, to just use that first semester to transition into it, and then all the opportunities will be in there. So on day one, you don't have to be doing it all. And the classes kind of, as you get deeper in the concentration and specialization classes, they're not as heavy as a workload as the first semester I found.
Super. Any last final questions that are burning a hole in your brain, I guess?
I'm going to drop my email in the chat.
And I'll put mine as well. Yeah. Well, thank you all for coming. Please do reach out to us. We're very enthusiastic. Maybe too enthusiastic, but I don't know what to do about that. Always happy to chat and also can help connect. I mean, Admissions does a wonderful job at this, helping people sit in on classes, connect with current students, but we're also happy to help working through them or alongside them to help make those connections. If you are trying to decide, have that burning question about whether this is the right fit, we can help you with that too.
Thank you, Alice. Thank you, Allie. Thank you, Ebwa, so much for your perspectives. It was really great.
All right. Well, I think that's the time. So we hope you have a great summer and make good choices that are right for you about school. Yeah.
Thanks, everybody. Nice to virtually meet you.